When a narcissist reaches the point where they know with absolute certainty that you will never come back, the first and most destabilizing experience they face is the final, permanent loss of control. You have to understand that this is not about losing a relationship in the way a healthy, empathetic person understands that experience. For a narcissist, control is the entire relationship. It is the core mechanism through which they regulate their own volatile emotions, maintain their carefully constructed self-image, and protect themselves from deep, underlying feelings of inadequacy or total emptiness. As long as there is even a tiny sliver of a chance that you might return, argue, try to explain yourself, or react in any way, they still feel a sense of leverage. The firm knowledge that you are gone for good removes that leverage entirely. This realization creates a profound psychological threat that they are ill-equipped to handle. Narcissistic functioning relies heavily on the core belief that they can influence how other people feel, how they think, and how they respond to them. When you stop responding, when you stop engaging, and when you stop orbiting their emotional gravity, it is a clear signal that they no longer have access to your internal world. This is deeply unsettling for them because it forces them to confront something they have worked their entire lives to avoid: raw, unmitigated powerlessness. Healthy, secure individuals can tolerate feelings of powerlessness as a normal, albeit uncomfortable, part of life. Narcissists, however, cannot. It triggers intense shame, profound vulnerability, and a terrifying sense of internal collapse. Loss of control also completely shatters the illusion of superiority that the narcissist maintains. If you can walk away and stay away, it fundamentally challenges the story they tell themselves and the world that they are indispensable, special, or irreplaceable. Your absence becomes undeniable evidence that their influence over you was never as absolute or as powerful as they convinced themselves it was. Rather than taking the time to process this difficult insight, they immediately defend against it. They may minimize your importance, devalue what you meant to them, or even convince themselves that they were the ones who chose to disengage all along. These mental distortions are not simple lies in the traditional sense. They are complex psychological survival strategies. What makes this phase particularly intense is that there is no easy external fix for them. They cannot argue you back, they cannot charm you back, and they cannot provoke you back into their sphere. Without access to you, they are forced to sit alone with an unregulated, painful internal state. This is why the final loss of control often leads to increased rigidity, emotional numbness, or even bouts of covert hostility. It is simply the mind attempting to restore a sense of dominance where none actually exists. When a narcissist realizes that you will never come back, direct engagement becomes far too risky for them to attempt, so they often shift their strategy into what we call silent surveillance. This is not curiosity, and it certainly is not longing in any healthy sense of the word. It is a persistent monitoring behavior driven by intense anxiety, a sense of entitlement, and a desperate need to reassert psychological dominance without exposing themselves to the risk of further rejection. Contacting you directly would mean they have to acknowledge your autonomy, and your autonomy is the very thing that threatens them the most. Watching you from a distance allows them to feel informed about your life without having to make themselves vulnerable. This surveillance can take many different forms. They may check your social media accounts obsessively, pay close attention to who interacts with your posts, or gather information through mutual acquaintances. Sometimes it is subtle and covert, while other times it is relentless. What really matters here is their motive. They are tracking you to see whether you are suffering, stagnant, or thriving. If you appear to be happy or emotionally regulated, it destabilizes them completely. Your ability to find stability without them directly contradicts the narrative they created that you needed them in order to function. That contradiction creates a level of cognitive dissonance that they simply cannot tolerate. At the same time, they are constantly scanning for any potential opening. Silent surveillance allows them to look for moments of weakness, loneliness, or life transitions. A breakup, a financial loss, or even a vague, melancholy post can be interpreted by them as a personal invitation. This is exactly why contact often comes long after the relationship has ended, arriving precisely when you believe they are gone for good. In their mind, time does not signal closure. Instead, it signals another opportunity to strike. Distance gives them plausible deniability and helps them preserve their fragile self-image if they decide to reappear in your life. There is also a deeply punitive element to this specific type of behavior. By refusing to engage with you openly, they are attempting to flip the power dynamic in their favor. Silence becomes a tool they use to suggest that you are insignificant, while they secretly ensure that you remain a constant psychological presence in their own mind. They want to be sure that they still exist in your awareness, even if they are no longer visible in your life. This is not a true absence. It is control exercised through invisibility. What makes this silent surveillance so particularly unsettling is that it is fueled by a toxic sense of entitlement. They believe they have an inherent right to information about you because you once served a specific psychological function for them. Even after you leave, that sense of ownership does not just disappear. Watching you from afar allows them to avoid taking any accountability for their actions while maintaining the illusion that they are still connected, still relevant, and still positioned above rather than outside of your life. When a narcissist knows that you are never coming back, they often shift into what can best be described as image repair mode. This is not about self-reflection or personal growth. It is a highly strategic response to the threat their ego has experienced. Your permanent departure creates a major rupture in the story they tell themselves and the rest of the world about who they are. To a narcissist, being seen as rejected, abandoned, or left behind is completely intolerable. It suggests a deficiency in their character, and deficiency is something they cannot psychologically integrate into their identity. So instead of processing the loss internally, they move outward and begin obsessively managing public perception. They become preoccupied with how the situation looks to others rather than what the experience actually means. Conversations are subtly edited to suit their needs. Details are omitted, distorted, or completely reframed. You are suddenly recast as unstable, ungrateful, overly sensitive, or impossible to please. This is not always done with obvious, outward malice. Often, it is delivered calmly, even convincingly, because they have managed to believe the lie themselves in that moment. The goal is not to understand the truth, but to eliminate any version of the story in which they are at fault. Taking responsibility would require them to feel shame, and shame is psychologically annihilating for them. Image repair also serves another vital function for the narcissist. It reassures them that they still hold social power. By controlling the narrative, they attempt to control the emotional responses of the people around them. Sympathy, validation, and allegiance from friends or family act as essential substitutes for the regulation you once provided for them. Each nod of agreement from a listener reinforces their internal belief that they are justified, misunderstood, or even victimized by you. This external validation becomes a temporary scaffold holding their fractured self-image together. What is particularly important to understand is that this behavior intensifies significantly when you remain silent. Your refusal to defend yourself, explain your side of the story, or correct the record removes their opportunity for direct, productive conflict. Without your participation, they are free to construct a completely one-sided reality. This can feel deeply unfair, especially when you know the truth of what really happened. But for the narcissist, the absence of your voice is interpreted as permission, not as dignity. This phase often includes performative happiness, exaggerated claims of success, or sudden displays of moral superiority. These are not signs of genuine peace or moving on. They are visual props meant to signal that they are thriving without you, that losing you had no impact on their life, and that nothing of value was lost. All of these displays exist only to protect a fragile internal structure that has already been badly destabilized. When a narcissist finally understands that you are never coming back, their immediate attempts to pull you back often cease. This does not happen because they have finally accepted the loss, but because they have learned that timing has become everything. This is where the concept of delayed hoovering emerges. The delay is entirely intentional. Reaching out too soon risks another rejection, and a second rejection would finally confirm their total loss of control. By waiting, they hope to regain a sense of psychological advantage and wait for a moment where you might be more vulnerable. They are playing a game of patience, waiting for the dust to settle, hoping that with enough time, your boundaries will erode and they can once again weave themselves back into the fabric of your life. Recognizing this pattern is your greatest defense against falling back into a cycle that you have already fought so hard to escape. Distance dulls your emotional defenses in their mind, not because you have forgotten the harm that was done, but because they believe that time naturally weakens the boundaries you have built. Delayed hoovering is rooted in a deep sense of entitlement rather than any genuine attachment. You must realize that they do not experience time the way an emotionally healthy person does. To them, relationships are not chapters that have been closed and finished. They are resources that have simply been placed on a shelf for later use. Even years later, they may feel entirely justified in reappearing in your life because they never processed the relationship as a mutual bond with a natural end. They processed it as an extension of themselves that, for some reason, malfunctioned. This delay helps them preserve the fantasy that access to you can be restored whenever conditions feel favorable to them. These attempts often arrive quietly and indirectly. It might be a neutral message, a nostalgic reference, a sudden apology that lacks any real accountability, or even a fabricated crisis designed specifically to trigger your empathy. The tone they use is often much softer than before because they have learned that open aggression failed to get the results they wanted. What they are testing is not reconciliation, but responsiveness. A reply, even a polite one, signals to them that the door is not fully closed. That signal matters far more to them than the actual content of the conversation. Delayed hoovering also allows them to rewrite history internally. With enough time, they can convince themselves that the past conflict was mutual, exaggerated, or simply resolved by the passage of time alone. This mental revision reduces the risk of shame when they eventually reach out to you. They are not returning as someone who caused you harm. They are returning as someone who is just checking in, offering a sense of closure, or extending goodwill. This reframing protects their ego while positioning you as the person who must decide how kind, mature, or forgiving to be. What makes delayed hoovering particularly destabilizing is that it often occurs exactly when you are finally doing better. Your stability, your growth, or your emotional detachment registers as a direct challenge to their significance. This reach out is not a sign that they are missing you. It is a reactive response to no longer occupying space in your inner world. The timing is rarely accidental. It coincides with moments when they sense that your independence has solidified, and the attempt becomes a last effort to reinsert themselves, not to rebuild a real connection, but to reassert relevance in a dynamic they believe should never have fully ended. When a narcissist knows you are never coming back, rewriting history becomes a psychological necessity rather than a simple choice. The reality of the relationship threatens their self-concept, so the past must be reshaped into something they can actually live with. They cannot hold a view of themselves in which they caused harm and still see themselves as competent, superior, or justified. Accepting the full truth would require them to take accountability, and accountability activates shame. For a narcissist, shame is not just a mild or uncomfortable emotion. It feels completely annihilating. To avoid it, their memory itself becomes incredibly flexible. This rewriting often happens quietly and gradually. Events are minimized, altered, or stripped of their original emotional weight. Moments where you expressed your pain are reframed as you being overly sensitive. The boundaries you set for your own well-being are recalled as acts of betrayal. Their own manipulative or abusive behaviors are reinterpreted as reasonable, measured responses to your supposed flaws. Over time, this distorted version of the past becomes the only one they can access. It is not that they are consciously lying at every turn. It is that their mind selectively edits reality to preserve their psychological survival. What makes this process particularly destabilizing for those who lived through the relationship is how confidently the narcissist holds this revised story. They speak with absolute certainty, often with a sense of moral clarity about what really happened. This conviction can cause you to feel self-doubt, especially if you were already conditioned to question your own perceptions. The rewritten history is not just a private defense mechanism. It becomes a weapon. It is used to justify their behavior, recruit sympathy from others, and position themselves as the one who was misunderstood or wronged. Rewriting history also allows them to detach emotionally without ever having to go through the process of grieving. Healthy separation requires acknowledging both the good and the harm that occurred. Narcissists, however, cannot integrate that kind of complexity. By flattening the past into a story where they were reasonable and you were difficult, they eliminate all emotional conflict. This simplification protects them from loss, remorse, and vulnerability. It also preserves the fantasy that nothing meaningful was lost when you finally left. Over time, this altered narrative becomes the foundation for any future interactions. If they ever reach out again, they do so from this revised version of reality. Their apologies lack any depth because the harm no longer exists in their memory. Accountability feels unnecessary to them because in their mind, there is simply nothing to account for. This is why conversations about finding closure feel circular and invalidating. You are speaking from your lived experience while they are speaking from a reconstructed past designed to defend against their own psychological collapse. When a narcissist knows you are never coming back, seeking a replacement is rarely about true connection or mutual healing. It is about distracting themselves from an internal state they cannot tolerate. Your absence creates a vacuum, not of love, but of emotional regulation. You once absorbed their emotions, validated their identity, and stabilized their self-image. Without that specific function, they experience intense restlessness, irritability, and a sense of internal chaos. A new person becomes a way to silence that discomfort rather than address the root of it. This replacement is often rushed and superficial. Intimacy appears intense early on because it is performative, not earned. The narcissist mirrors, idealizes, and accelerates attachment to recreate the emotional control they lost with you. What looks like moving on is actually just an attempt to override the destabilizing impact of your departure. They are not choosing someone new because that person fits them better. They are choosing whoever is available, responsive, and emotionally open enough to plug the gap you left behind. Importantly, this new connection is not evidence that you were replaceable. It is evidence that they cannot sit with themselves. Solitude forces self-awareness, and self-awareness threatens the fragile structure they rely on to function. The replacement allows them to avoid introspection entirely. As long as someone else is reacting to them, admiring them, or struggling to please them, they do not have to confront the loss of control your absence represents. This dynamic also serves an external purpose. Being seen with someone new helps them reinforce the image that they are desirable, wanted, and totally unaffected. It is a way to communicate indirectly that they are winning. The relationship becomes a prop rather than a genuine bond. The new person is unconsciously assigned a role, not welcomed as an equal partner. They are expected to regulate the narcissist's emotions, validate their identity, and absorb their projections just as you once did. Over time, the same patterns will emerge because nothing has changed internally. The charm will fade, the entitlement will surface, and the emotional demands will escalate. The replacement is not spared because the issue was never you. It was always the narcissist's dependence on external sources to manage an unstable inner world. Your departure did not cause this cycle. It only exposed it. When a narcissist knows you are never coming back, one of the more subtle responses they have is punitive indifference. This is not genuine detachment or emotional maturity. It is a defensive posture designed to reclaim a sense of superiority after the loss of control. By acting as though you never mattered, they attempt to reverse the power dynamic. If they can convince themselves and others that you were insignificant, then your departure no longer feels like a rejection. It feels like a dismissal that they chose. This indifference is often highly performative. It may show up as sudden emotional coldness, a refusal to acknowledge the history you shared, or an almost exaggerated lack of reaction. The message they want to convey is that your presence was irrelevant and your absence is inconsequential. This stance protects them from their own feelings of vulnerability. Admitting that you mattered would mean admitting to a loss, and that loss would mean facing pain they are not equipped to process. At the same time, punitive indifference serves as a form of punishment. It is meant to provoke self-doubt, hurt, or confusion in you. If they can make you feel erased, minimized, or dismissed, they regain a sense of influence over your emotional state without having to engage with you directly. This is especially effective if you were once deeply connected. The contrast between that former intensity and their present indifference can feel very destabilizing, which is precisely the point. What makes this behavior particularly complex is that it often coexists with their private preoccupation. Publicly, they act completely unbothered. Privately, they may still monitor your life, ruminate on your shared past, or feel threatened by your progress. The indifference is a shield, not a reflection of inner peace. It allows them to maintain an image of control while avoiding the risk of exposure that direct contact would bring. Punitive indifference also reinforces their internal narrative. By treating you as though you never mattered, they can avoid integrating the painful reality that you were important and that your departure actually had consequences. This emotional erasure is not about healing. It is about containment. It is a way to seal off a wound without ever cleaning it, to cover their loss with a veneer of superiority. The absence of a visible reaction from them is not proof that you were unimportant. It is proof that acknowledging your importance would destabilize them more than they can tolerate. When a narcissist knows you are never coming back, there is often a striking split between what they show the world and what is happening internally. On the surface, they may appear calm, rational, or even relieved. They present an image of total composure that suggests acceptance and emotional control. This outer calm is not a sign of resolution. It is a defensive performance designed to prevent further injury to a fragile self-structure. Inside, however, the loss has created significant destabilization that they cannot safely acknowledge. They are performing their own composure to hide the fact that they have lost their primary means of regulating their own sense of self. Understanding this gap is crucial, as it explains why their behavior remains so rigid even when they are supposedly moving on. They are locked in a struggle to maintain a reality that no longer exists, and your absence is a constant, quiet reminder that their internal world is no longer as protected as they pretend it is.